On a humid August night in 1814, British soldiers stood in front of the White House with torches in their hands. They weren't there to negotiate. They weren't there to surrender. They were there to burn down the symbol of American independence. And they succeeded. In the next 20 minutes, you'll discover how the most powerful nation in North America watched its capital city burn, how American soldiers fled in panic, and how the president's wife barely escaped with the nation's most precious possessions. But more importantly, you'll understand why this night changed everything, not just for America, but for the future of the entire continent. This is the story of the sacking of Washington, D.C., 1814, and it all started with a decision made thousands of miles away. In 1812, President James Madison made a fateful decision. He asked Congress to declare war on Great Britain. Most Americans thought he was crazy. Britain was the world's most powerful nation. America was barely 40 years old. But Madison believed Britain was threatening American sovereignty, and more importantly, he wanted to expand westward into British-controlled Canada. The War of 1812, as it came to be known, was supposed to be a quick American victory. Instead, it became a humiliating stalemate that would nearly tear the young nation apart. For 2 years, the war dragged on with no clear winner. American forces failed to conquer Canada. British naval blockades strangled American trade. American ships were captured. American sailors were pressed into British service. The American economy was collapsing. And then, in 1814, everything changed. After defeating Napoleon in Europe in April of that year, Britain could finally turn its full military attention to North America. The British military machine, the same force that had defeated the Emperor of France, now aimed its guns at the United States. British General Robert Ross, a veteran of the Napoleonic Wars, arrived in North America in the summer of 1814 with a clear mission: strike at the heart of American power. Washington, D.C., the capital city, was his target. The British knew something crucial that many Americans had forgotten. Washington, D.C. was not a heavily fortified military stronghold. It was a city of government buildings, many of them still under construction. The Capitol building itself wasn't finished. The White House, then called the President's House, was relatively new, only 14 years old, and the city's defenses were laughably weak. As General Ross sailed into the Chesapeake Bay in August 1814, he had approximately 4,000 well-trained, battle-hardened soldiers at his command. He also had the full support of the British Navy. What stood between him and Washington, D.C. was an American militia force that had never fought a major battle, and a handful of regular army soldiers. When word reached Washington that British forces were heading toward the city, panic set in. The government scrambled to organize a defense. Secretary of War John Armstrong, one of the most controversial figures in this story, initially believed the British wouldn't actually attack the capital. He thought they would target Baltimore instead. This miscalculation would have catastrophic consequences. On August 24, 1814, exactly 210 years ago, the largest battle of the War of 1812 took place just outside Washington, D.C. It was called the Battle of Bladensburg, and it would seal the fate of the capital. American General William Winder, a lawyer and politician with no significant military experience, was put in charge of defending Washington. Winder assembled approximately 7,000 militia and regular soldiers, mostly untrained militiamen who had never seen combat. Many of them were armed with old weapons. Some didn't even have uniforms. They were facing British soldiers who had just finished fighting across Europe. British General Robert Ross arrived at Bladensburg with approximately 4,000 troops, but they were professionals. Many had fought in Spain against Napoleon. Many had been decorated for bravery. They were disciplined, well-armed, and confident. The battle began around 6 in the morning on August 24th. The American militia was positioned behind the Potomac River with earthworks and defensive positions. Initially, they did well. The British forces had to cross the river, and American artillery fire, particularly from Commodore Joshua Barney's naval gunners, inflicted significant casualties on the British troops. For about 30 minutes, it looked like the Americans might actually hold their ground. But then the American militia panicked. No one is entirely sure why the panic started. Some accounts suggest that when a militia unit broke ranks, others followed in a kind of domino effect. Other accounts say that mounted British cavalry charges frightened the untrained American soldiers. What we do know is that within 30 minutes of fierce fighting, the entire American army that was supposed to defend Washington had completely dissolved. Commodore Joshua Barney, the naval officer in charge of the artillery, fought to the last moment. He was wounded 3 times but refused to abandon his position. When his men finally retreated, he was captured by British forces. But even Barney's heroism couldn't stop the collapse. General Winder watched helplessly as his army fell apart. A militia officer named Colonel William Thornton later reported that he had never seen anything like it. American soldiers were running in every direction, abandoning their positions, abandoning their weapons, abandoning any hope of organized defense. By noon on August 24, 1814, the road to Washington, D.C. lay completely open. General Ross and his British army had won a decisive victory without even needing to deploy their entire force. What happened next would shock the young nation. When word reached Washington that the American militia had been defeated at Bladensburg, the government went into complete chaos. President James Madison, who had briefly visited the battlefield that morning, was informed that his army had collapsed. He was also informed that British soldiers were now marching toward the capital. Madison had to make an immediate decision: stay and face the British or flee. He chose to flee. The President of the United States, along with most of the government, mounted horses and rode out of the city in the early afternoon of August 24th. They headed toward the countryside, unsure if they would ever return. But before Madison left, Dolley Madison made a decision that would later be celebrated in American history. While the president rushed to safety, Dolley Madison stayed behind in the White House. She was determined to save something, anything of value from the building. Dolley Madison was one of the most famous women in America at the time. She was known for her graceful hosting of White House parties, her intelligence, and her courage. As British soldiers were reported to be getting closer to the White House, Dolley faced an impossible choice: leave immediately and save her own life, or stay and risk being captured. She chose to stay. With the help of several staff members, Dolley Madison gathered the most important items in the White House. She packed trunks full of government documents, she saved silverware and other valuables, and most importantly, she saved the famous portrait of George Washington that hung in the White House, a full-length portrait painted by Gilbert Stuart. According to contemporary accounts, Dolley Madison rushed through the White House, gathering items and throwing them into trunks. A staff member named Jean-Pierre Soussat helped her. Another servant, Paul Jennings, who was enslaved and later wrote about this event, also helped her gather the items. As British soldiers were reported to be just minutes away from the White House, Dolley Madison made her final decision. She could not carry everything. She could not save everything, but she could save the portrait of George Washington. According to some accounts, she actually cut the portrait out of its frame to carry it more easily. With the portrait of Washington in her possession, Dolley Madison climbed into a carriage and fled the White House. Behind her, the building that represented American democracy stood empty, abandoned to whatever fate it awaited. The time was approximately 3:30 p.m. on August 24, 1814. The president's wife had escaped the White House. The president was already gone, and the city was about to be invaded. What happened next would be described as the greatest humiliation the young United States had ever experienced. As darkness fell on August 24, 1814, British soldiers marched into Washington, D.C. They encountered almost no organized resistance. The militia had fled, the government had fled, most civilians had evacuated the city. The British Army essentially walked into an empty capital. General Ross entered the city at the head of his troops. According to accounts, he was somewhat surprised at how easily his army had taken the capital. He established his headquarters and began planning what to do next. The decision to burn Washington was made that night by British commanders. Some accounts suggest it was ordered by General Ross himself. Other accounts suggest it was decided by the British naval commanders involved. What we know is that by late evening on August 24, 1814, fires were being set throughout the city. The targets were strategic, government buildings. The British were here to punish the American government for starting a war they believed was unjust. They were here to demonstrate that even the capital of the United States was vulnerable to British military power. And they were going to make that point by destroying the symbols of American government. The first major fire was set at the Capitol building. This structure, the home of the American Congress, was not fully completed in 1814. But it was still a significant building and a powerful symbol. British soldiers piled furniture and other combustible materials inside and set them on fire. The flames rose high into the night sky, illuminating the city. One British officer, named George Robert Gleig, left a written account of what he witnessed. He described the Capitol building as being engulfed in flames so intense that the roof collapsed. He noted that the destruction was awful and magnificent, terrible to witness, but also impressive in its scale. After the Capitol, British soldiers made their way to the President's house, the White House. It was late evening, perhaps around 8 p.m., when they arrived at the residence. The building was empty. The president had fled. The First Lady had escaped with the portrait of Washington. The house stood defenseless. British soldiers entered the building. They found furniture, paintings, valuable items, all the possessions of the presidential residence. According to contemporary accounts, British soldiers ransacked the White House. They ate food that had been left in the kitchens. They helped themselves to wine from the presidential cellars. Some accounts suggest they sat down at the president's dinner table and ate the meal that had been prepared for him. Then they set the building on fire. The flames consumed the White House. The roof collapsed. The walls crumbled. What had been the symbol of American executive power became a burned-out shell. The building that George Washington had occupied, that every president had called home, was now a ruin. A British officer named James Scott, who participated in the burning, later wrote, "All the public offices, the president's house, and the Great Bridge were set fire to and burned during the night. Such destruction and havoc you can scarcely imagine." Beyond the Capitol and the White House, British soldiers set fire to other government buildings. The Treasury building was burned. The War Department was burned. The Library of Congress, which housed thousands of important American documents and books, was burned. The British were systematically destroying the physical infrastructure of American government. The burning continued through the night of August 24th and into the morning of August 25th. The sky above Washington, D.C. glowed orange and red from the fires. Smoke filled the air. The smell of burning wood and burning buildings hung over the city. By dawn on August 25, 1814, much of official Washington, D.C. lay in ruins. The capital of the United States had been invaded, its government buildings had been burned, and the president had fled the city. It was, by any measure, a catastrophic military and political defeat. But the British were not finished. There were still other targets, and British General Ross wanted to maximize the humiliation and damage inflicted on the American government. While the White House burned, President James Madison and his wife, Dolley Madison, were separated and hiding in the Maryland countryside. Madison had fled to a tavern called Salona, owned by a man named Caleb Bentley. Dolley Madison had fled to a different location, staying with friends. For several hours, they didn't know if the other was alive or dead. The panic that had seized the government was complete. Secretary of State James Monroe, who would later become president, was riding through the countryside on horseback, unsure of the situation. Secretary of War John Armstrong, whose miscalculation about British intentions had contributed to the disaster, was being blamed for the failure to defend the capital. Meanwhile, British General Ross continued his rampage through Washington. He set fire to the Navy Yard where American ships and military supplies were stored. He set fire to other government facilities. But he made a crucial decision. He did not burn the city indiscriminately. Private homes were largely spared. Libraries, hospitals, and other civilian facilities were not targeted. The British, despite their anger at the American government, maintained a certain discipline about what they destroyed. General Ross understood something important. If he burned down the entire city and killed numerous civilians, it would turn him into a villain in the eyes of the world. But if he carefully targeted government buildings, the symbols of American power, he could humiliate the government without appearing to be a barbarian. This distinction between burning government buildings and burning the city would become important in how the sacking of Washington was remembered. The British were making a political point, not simply engaged in random destruction. However, there was one moment when the discipline almost broke. A group of British soldiers encountered an American sniper or sharpshooter who fired on them from a house. In retaliation, British soldiers wanted to burn the entire neighborhood, but General Ross intervened and prevented the mass destruction. Only a few buildings were burned in retaliation for the sniper attack. By the afternoon of August 25, 1814, British commanders had decided they had accomplished their mission. Washington, D.C. had been invaded. Government buildings had been burned. The humiliation had been complete. But the British also understood that staying longer was risky. American militia forces were gathering in the surrounding countryside. Reinforcements might be on the way. It was time to withdraw. General Ross gave the order to leave Washington. British soldiers began their withdrawal, marching back toward their ships on the Potomac River and the Chesapeake Bay. They had occupied the capital of the United States for less than 24 hours. The American government began to creep back into the city. President Madison returned. Government officials returned. Dolley Madison and President Madison were finally reunited. They found the White House a burned-out ruin. They found government buildings destroyed. They found a city in shock. But they also found a nation that was shocked into action. The sacking of Washington in 1814 had enormous consequences for American history. First, it led directly to a change in American defense policy. The United States began building stronger military fortifications. The Washington Monument, which would later be constructed, was partly a response to the city's vulnerability. Americans understood that they needed better defenses. Second, the burning of government buildings meant that crucial records had been destroyed. The Library of Congress lost thousands of books and documents. Government archives were destroyed. It took years for the United States to reconstruct these records. Third, the White House had to be rebuilt. The exterior walls had survived the fire, but the interior was completely destroyed. Reconstruction took several years. When President Madison returned to the White House, it was not the same building his predecessors had occupied. But perhaps the most important consequence was political. The War of 1812, which had seemed to many Americans like a pointless conflict, suddenly took on new meaning. Americans who had opposed the war found it difficult to maintain that opposition when American territory had been invaded and the capital burned. 3 months after the sacking of Washington, in December of 1814, American and British negotiators met in Ghent, Belgium. They negotiated a peace treaty. The Treaty of Ghent essentially restored the status quo. Neither side gained territorial advantage. But the treaty did end the fighting. Many Americans felt the war had been a draw or even a loss. But the psychological impact of surviving the burning of Washington and then negotiating a peace treaty with the British gave Americans a sense of accomplishment. The United States had fought the world's most powerful nation and survived. Dolley Madison, who had saved the portrait of George Washington, became a national hero. Her courage on August 24, 1814, was celebrated throughout the country. The portrait itself, the same one she had rushed to save, hung in the White House again and was seen as a symbol of continuity and resilience. Ironically, the sacking of Washington also elevated the status of the president's house. It had been damaged but not destroyed.
After it was rebuilt, it became known as the White House, a name that grew out of the whitewashing of the burned exterior walls. The building became a symbol of American power and resilience. The British, despite their military victory in 1814, ultimately lost their strategic objective. They had hoped to demoralize Americans and force them to accept unfavorable peace terms. Instead, the burning of Washington hardened American resolve. Americans rallied around their nation. The war ended, and the United States emerged with its independence intact and with a sense that it could survive even attacks on its own capital. General Robert Ross, the British commander who had led the sacking of Washington, was killed just 2 weeks later in a battle near Baltimore. He was shot by an American sharpshooter. Some Americans saw his death as a kind of justice, that he had been punished for the burning of their capital. Whether or not that's how we should interpret it, Ross's death did mark a turning point in the war. After his death, British military operations in North America became less aggressive. The War of 1812 continued for a few more months, but the sacking of Washington essentially marked the peak of British military success in North America. After the burning of the capital and the subsequent loss of General Ross, British operations became more defensive. What's remarkable about the sacking of Washington, D.C. is that it's often forgotten or underappreciated in American history. Many Americans don't know that their capital was invaded and burned. Many don't know that the White House was destroyed. Many don't know that Dolley Madison saved the portrait of George Washington. This is partly because the event happened early in American history, and it's overshadowed by later events like the Civil War. But it's also because the recovery was so complete that the evidence of the burning largely disappeared. Yet, the event had profound consequences. It shaped American defense policy. It shaped American military development. It shaped American national identity. And it demonstrated a crucial lesson that would echo through American history, that even the mightiest nations can be vulnerable if they are unprepared. On August 24th and 25th, 1814, the United States experienced something it had never experienced before and would not experience again: the invasion of its capital city and the burning of its government buildings. It was a humbling moment for a young nation that had declared independence less than 40 years earlier. But it was also a defining moment. Americans responded not with despair, but with determination. They rebuilt their capital, they continued their nation, and they emerged from the experience with a stronger sense of national identity and purpose. The White House stands today as a symbol of that resilience. When you look at that building, you're looking at a structure that was burned by British soldiers in 1814, rebuilt by Americans, and has stood as the seat of American executive power ever since. The portrait of George Washington that Dolley Madison saved still hangs in the White House. It survived the fire. It survived everything that came after. It's a reminder of courage, of sacrifice, and of the resilience of the American nation. This is the story of the sacking of Washington, D.C. It's a story that deserves to be remembered because it shaped the nation we know today.